Welcome back. In the previous one, we talked about how postnatal depression is something that can affect a lot of men. And in this last film, what I want to talk about briefly is how we can get men the help that they might sometimes need. Um, Despite everything we know about postnatal depression now, it still feels like dads who are experiencing mental health distress following the birth of a child remain relatively invisible, um, both in terms of society, but also in terms of sometimes in terms of healthcare. And I think one of the reasons for this has to do with how we conceive of and how we talk about what it means to be a man. Um, as I hinted at earlier, when I talked about my own experiences and when I kind of tried to get help, I was often told to essentially just to man up, to be the rock of the family, to be the person who supports the family and puts my own needs, of my own mental health care needs, um, after everyone else's needs. Essentially, to kind of see myself as someone who had to support other people within the family unit before I looked after my own mental health. And these kind of attitudes are deeply ingrained in the way in which we talk about how men should behave. And we expect men to be masculine, and what that means often is that we expect them to be independent. We expect them to be tough, to be robust. We expect them to always deny pain. We expect them to deny pain, and to kind of deny help seeking a lot of the time. Even when men are experiencing debilitating mental health distress, even when they're suicidal, we still expect them and we still tell them that they should just man up. And one outcome of all of this is that men often deny that they're experiencing any kind of difficulty. Um, in fact, a lot of research suggests that when men are experiencing mental health distress, what they might do instead is try and reassert those experiences of masculinity. So rather than asking for help, what a lot of men might end up doing is trying to find ways of feeling masculine, feeling like they're tough, feeling like they're independent, feeling like they're robust. So that might include things like binge drinking, taking drugs, spending lots and lots of time in the gym, sometimes even things like domestic violence. So there's all kinds of evidence to suggest that telling men that they need to man up isn't helpful, and it particularly isn't helpful if they're experiencing forms of mental illness. And what they engage in, these kinds of what we call toxic practices, essentially things like binge drinking or taking drugs, are all forms of trying to self-medicate or self-cope with the things that they're going through. um, One of the other things that a lot of men, particularly men who are suffering from postnatal depression, often do is to normalize their experiences, to say that what they're going through is what every dad goes through. And the way they talk about postnatal depression is often in terms of this idea that if you're not dead, if you haven't committed suicide, then there is nothing wrong. Or to put it differently, I'm okay because I'm not dead. And that's a really extreme view that some men take when they're experiencing postnatal depression, because they're forced to believe, or they're taught to believe, that postnatal depression means they're somehow unmasculine or unmanly. My own experiences probably make this point quite clear. I'm a researcher who has studied things like masculinity and the impact that masculinity has had on men's help-seeking behaviours. So you would think that if any man who was ever in a good position to seek help and to understand his own condition, it would be me. And yet, after my son was born, I frequently found myself trying to minimize my own experiences, trying to retell the story of what I was going through in less severe forms. Looking back, I can understand how difficult that period was for me and how severe some of the issues I was experiencing were. But while I was there, I was often trying to mitigate, often trying to reshape and retell myself that nothing was wrong, because I was still surviving, because I was still okay. But kind of linked in with all of that, all of those experiences, was this experience of shame. I experienced shame because I wasn't good enough to be a parent, wasn't good enough to be this tough masculine individual who could look after his family and provide for his family and be supportive of his family. So on the one hand, I wanted to be all those things, to look after my family, and when I found I couldn't, it resulted in feelings like shame and guilt, which only made my condition worse. So how do we help men? How do we help men who are struggling with postnatal depression to get them the help that they need? Well, I think partly the answer to this question is not straightforward, because I think men aren't straightforward. I think one thing that we might need to think about is how health services can be more direct in getting men the help that they need, whether it's in terms of routine screening for all new dads, whether it's in terms of ensuring adequate funding for the health services to ensure that all men who require help are able to get help, not just in the short term, but in the long term. When I talk about funding for the NHS and funding for dads in particular, a lot of people tend to think like, there's not a lot of money available, and we should be prioritizing mums. And I absolutely agree. I think sometimes we should be prioritizing mums and their needs. But beyond that, we should also be prioritizing the family unit. And anytime the family unit, either individuals within the family unit are struggling, or anytime the family unit as a whole is struggling, we should be supporting the family unit. And there are lots of services that are available to postnatal to families, but also to dads who are struggling. Things like psychotherapy, but also talking to your GP about or a midwife or a health visitor about what services are available is a useful starting point. Some men may not want to talk to a health professional. There is evidence to suggest that men may experience that particularly antenatal and perinatal health services to be too feminine, particularly because a lot of the staff are women. So we might need to find other ways of getting dads to talk. One good way is to have people who a man might see long term, for example, like a barber or even someone in the gym, and having someone who they can talk to, open up and talk about those issues. Those are all really useful ways. Most of the evidence, though, suggests that the partner is probably in the best place to help dads who are experiencing postnatal depression. Having the skills and having the ability to talk to a dad who is struggling is a really vital skill, and some of those things can be learned, whether it's simply things like writing a short letter or talking to your partner about what they're experiencing, or getting them to talk to a GP or getting them to talk to a health professional can be really important. As a society, we also have to have discussions about how we tell men to behave. And this is also true of families. I think we place a lot of pressure on dads to be the kind of the ideal version to provide for their families, but also to be involved in active care. We want dads to be involved in active care, but we also don't want to diminish and remove the experiences that they might be going through, particularly in terms of their mental health. We as a society have become so much better at providing men with the tools and the skills and the space to talk about their mental health, but we also now need to do that for postnatal depression specifically. And some of these conversations might occur between individuals, some of these conversations might occur within families, but we also need a conversation nationally about how we relate to dads who have postnatal depression, how we help dads with postnatal depression. My own experience might be useful for some of you. So for a long time, I denied that I was going through and experiencing any form of postnatal depression, but it was also becoming increasingly clear as the months went by that I was struggling, that things couldn't continue as they were. And I was lucky that my partner one day, I guess she decided she'd had enough. She got fed up and she walked me down, and I mean this literally. She physically pushed me down to see my GP. And I think I'm lucky that I spoke to my GP, and my GP instantly recognized what it was. That was symptoms of postnatal depression, and I was able to get care. I was able to get effective care. That means I'm still here today to be able to talk about my experiences and hopefully share my experiences so that none of you will have to go through the same things. Lots of dads talk to me about this idea that it will just go away. It doesn't just go away. Depression is not something that just disappears magically one day. It is a condition that affects you, and doesn't just affect you, but affects your entire family. And if you don't get help, if you don't get treatment, if you don't get medication, if you don't get the help that you think is useful for you in your personal circumstances, it will eat away at you. It will eat away at your family. Don't do what I did. Don't be me. Don't delay help seeking because of some strange notion that you could be better, or that things will just pass, or things will get better on their own. They very rarely do. I suppose in a sense I am lucky. I am lucky because I'm still here. I'm still here and able to have a relationship with my child. Um, and lots of people don't like it when I talk about postnatal depression. They don't like it when I talk about postnatal depression in men, I suppose partly because they don't like men talking about difficulties, particularly with their mental health. It is important that we talk about it, not just for ourselves, but for our children as well. One day my child is going to grow up and he may or may not experience difficulties with his own mental health. I would rather he grew up in a world, in a society, in a family that told him that it was okay to be not okay, that told him that to have difficulties with his own mental health is okay, that he can get help and that he can come to both of his parents to ask for that help. One day my child might see all of this. One day my child might see I've been talking about my own experiences of postnatal depression. He will see that I've written and I've talked to lots of people about what happened to me. I suppose one day when he is old enough, I will have to have a conversation with him about what I went through, and I would also tell him about how all the things I did to get help to get better, because I want to get better. I'm not saying it's an easy path to get better. It's a long journey, and often dads talk about this experience being a lifelong experience. You always try to be as healthy as you can mentally, and it may never end being this effort and this journey, but it's a worthwhile one. It's a worthwhile one because you get to see your child grow. You get to be there when your child is experiencing all the wonderful things that they are going to experience. For me personally, I'm glad I stuck around. I'm glad I got help. I'm glad my wife finally pushed me to go and talk to my GP, because I wouldn't have got the help I needed if she hadn't. I'm also glad I have my son. One day when he does ask me about what I was going through, I will tell him that I did struggle, but that I also love him deeply, and it was him, and it was my wife, and it was my family, and it was all the people within the health services who helped me get here that kept me going. Thank you for listening. If you feel that you need help, please follow the advice that's about to follow.
Hi, my name's Sarah Smith and I'm a cognitive behaviour therapist at Health in Mind. So I hope you found the video helpful. We just want to remind you that our perinatal service is open and we're open to both mums and dads. So if you feel that you've been affected by any of the issues talked about today, and if you have a child under 2, or if your partner's pregnant, or if you've recently lost a baby, please do get in touch with us. You will be fast-tracked for treatment. And even though we're still in the midst of a pandemic, we're very actively treating people in a number of different ways, including phone calls, online digital therapy, and video conferencing. So please do get in touch with us. And you're going to see a link in a moment to tell you how to do that. And we look forward to hearing from you.